We will now continue with part 2 of the shipwreck Alkimos. This is no place for anyone with a weak heart. A diary entry was written by a young American who took what he thought was a cushy part-time job as caretaker on the infamous shipwreck, the Alkimos. Wayne was very enthusiastic for the chance to earn some money and to also be able to do this favorite pastime, line fishing. The young man's diary convinced Jack Sue, a well-known and experienced Australian diver, who also wrote a book called Ghost of the Alkimos, that there was more to this ship than meets the eye. Jack, at first, thought the ghostly stories he had heard were a bit of a farce, until he started to read Wayne's diary entries. After Jack's experience on the Alkimos, he strongly advised that no one should ever go near this cursed ship. Unfortunately for the young American, his enthusiasm and excitement for this adventure would soon come to an abrupt and frightening end.
The young American began hearing noises at night. He began feeling a presence he couldn't see. He became too afraid to move around the ship. In his diary entries, he kept mentioning the steps above his cabin. Footsteps above his head. That's all he could hear all night long, when there should be no other footsteps. The next entry Jack Sue read was this: 14th of July 1963, 10:15 p.m. I've been down to the engine room, but never again. The most eeriest place on this ship. From the time I left my cabin, I could hear footsteps following me. I was scared out of my wits. End of diary entry. It was a very calm night with no winds and no movement on the ship when all of a sudden the doorway between the captain's cabin and the bridge slammed shut with tremendous force. Wayne described it as though somebody had deliberately slammed the door. He was so terrified that he dropped the torch and the book that he was carrying and fled in the opposite direction. He had no idea where he was going. He just knew he had to run, and he ended up down in the engine room, and eventually he found his way back to the cabin. Wayne vowed he would never go out of his cabin at night again. The noises went on and on. Wayne became more and more frantic. Finally, he could take no more. He left this cursed ship, and he was admitted to hospital, a psychiatric hospital. It seems Henry the Ghost had claimed his first caretaker. As far as we are aware, it took Wayne a long, long time to become anywhere near normal again. And it's something that will live with him for the rest of his life. This young man's excitement and exuberance turned into a frightening and horrifying experience that he most likely will never get over. but there are still more caretaker stories to come. After studying the diary, Jack Sue knew he had to see and hear what was going on. He joined up with a sound recordist, and one night, against their better judgment, they tried to record the noises that had driven the young American to the brink of madness. After eliminating noises like the sound of the sea and any other normal noises you would expect to hear, there were definitely noises that sounded like yells and screams. They knew it wasn't the sea or any other noises they could put it down to. The sound recordist was not a superstitious man at all, but the very next day he was very glad indeed to get off that ship. He said he would never go back on it again. His fears of the Alkimos linger to this day. Fears that are shared by his mate, Jack Sue. Jack said, "While I was laying there, I suddenly heard somebody moaning. It was coming from the bunk behind me." He likened it to someone rolling over in their sleep and sighing heavily. He pricked his ears up, thinking he was just hearing things, but after listening intently, sure enough, the moaning and sighing came again from right behind him. Jack wasted no time in getting out of that cabin. He knew he wasn't imagining anything. For a time, the owners of the ship employed other caretakers, but they didn't last long either. All have said they hear the footsteps clearly throughout the night. They hear the doors opening by themselves, and then slamming shut. Their tools and equipment simply disappear. After that, a young married couple took up the challenge of being caretakers. She was pregnant, but heartbreakingly, tragedy was just around the corner. Perhaps it was Henry the ghost, or perhaps it was coincidence. But one night during a gale, the woman suffered a bad fall on board. The beginning of yet another disastrous episode on the Alkimos. For hours the woman lay there injured and in agony, with the baby due at any moment. On shore, the rescue operation was underway, a rescue that couldn't come too soon. With many rescue and emergency care workers, they finally managed to get the woman off in a bosun's chair. Sadly, the woman lost her precious baby. They left the wreck, never to return. Still more caretakers were driven off this ship. Sometimes it was the noises, other times it was more specific. Cooking smells coming from the empty galley where there was no sign of any food. For over 30 years there has been speculation on what or who this ghost called Henry might be. A medium felt there had been a murder on board, and that the dead had returned to haunt the living. At one stage, a priest was brought in to exorcise the ghost. Unfortunately for him, he decided to do some fishing from the Alkimos deck. Each time the priest cast his line, the sinker would come straight back to him, as if someone was catching it from below and throwing it back. It ended up hitting the priest with such force right in the middle of his forehead that he was taken to hospital for the wound to be stitched. He also became very unwell, mysteriously, and as far as anybody knows, he never did return to the ship to perform the task of exorcising Henry. In Western Australia, the Alkimos ship achieved a degree of fame, or was it infamy? Of course, there are staunch believers and even stauncher disbelievers. One of the skeptics was a Perth radio announcer. But we will leave that story for another part to this legendary ship, the Alkimos.